Hi there, this is my penultimate collection summary video for the Mastertronic collection, and having looked at the best original Mastertronic games and the best Mastertronic re-releases, it's only fair to take a look at the 10 worst original Mastertronic releases. So these are the games that I really didn't enjoy playing when I did my original video reviews, and basically avoid these at all costs. And in 10th place we have Binary Design 1987 release Amarot. As mentioned in my recent Binary Design summary, this game is not actually too bad. It's a reasonable sort of scrolling shoot 'em up type game where you've got to eliminate all the enemies from a level. The enemies are insects, and then you kill the queen insect. The problem with this game, and the reason why it's in this top 10, is it's got a fatal bug in it. The bug is that basically on certain screens the number of enemies that you're supposed to eliminate is actually greater than the number of enemies that are found on the level, so you get stuck in the level and you can't get out of it. The enemies are possibly outside of the playing area that you can move around in. So basically it's a fatally bugged game. If you get that bug occurring in the game and it is random, then it's game over. You can't complete the level and you can't progress with the game, and that's why it's in this list of worst games. The 9th worst game in my list is a Mastertronic Plus release, one of the last releases from Mastertronic in fact. That's Rugby Manager. And this is a terrible rugby management simulation, quite obviously, given the name. And the reason it's terrible is that it's ported over from the Spectrum, really nasty Spectrum graphics. The font in particular is almost impossible to read, which, given that it's a management game where you need to look at player details and so on, is a little bit of a flaw. There's no sound in the game, there's very limited interaction as well. You can buy and sell one player at a time. There's no sort of training or management of the players. There's no formations, there's no positions for the players. You've just got a bunch of players, you pick 15 of them, play a game. During the game there's no interaction either, you just watch the game unfold on the screen. You can't make substitutions, you can't alter formation or tactics. It's basically just a really awful sports management simulation that you should avoid at all costs. Next up we have a release from 1986, and it's a combination of some of my most hated gameplay elements. It's Molecule Man, and the reason I hate this so much is, firstly, it's an isometric game. As you know, if you've watched any of my other videos, I'm not a fan of the isometric perspective. It's obviously trying to clone the sort of really popular games from Ultimate, games like Night Law and Alien 8, and also maybe Head Over Heels. It's got that same isometric style. It's a flick screen adventure. It's ported over from the Spectrum, and there's no effort been made whatsoever to enhance the graphics. They're just the dreary monochrome Spectrum graphics. But the worst thing about the game, despite the perspective and the graphics, is the fact that you're constantly in a battle to find these pills to top up your immunity, if you like, towards radiation. This timer ticks down in the corner throughout the game, and if that gets to 0, it's an instant game over. If you haven't found the coins to buy more pills to boost your health, then you can't explore the level. So it's a combination of having to explore these numerous screens to try and disable these circuit boards, whilst also trying to keep your health level topped up to a level where you don't die. So it's an utterly awful game. It's really slow moving as well, and progression from one screen to the next is really plodding, and yeah, basically it's utter crap. My 7th worst game is another game that I covered in my binary design developer focus last time around. This is Bosconian 87, a reimagining, if you like, of the Namco arcade game. And as I mentioned in my summary last time around, the reason it's so terrible is that the gameplay is really fast and you're losing lives almost immediately. As soon as the game starts, you're crashing into stuff or stuff shooting you. You know the game's going to be a struggle when it gives you something like 9 lives to start with, and those lives are lost really quickly. You fly around and the playing area is only just over half the size of the screen, which just makes it even more difficult. It's also got really bland sort of grey and blue graphics, and it's just a pale imitation of the game it's supposed to be an enhancement of, the original Bosconian from the early 80s. In 6th worst place, we have a game from the Mastertronic grid style packaging, an early release. This is Star Race, and the best way I can describe this is it's a single screen shoot 'em up game where you don't shoot anything for the first 3 levels. You've got a level where you've got to avoid ships crashing into you, a level where you've got to avoid asteroids, then a level where you've got to dock with a spaceship whilst avoiding things crashing into you, and when you finally do get to shoot, the level where you have to take on the alien mothership, it's so difficult to shoot the ship without getting shot yourself that you lose any remaining lives you've got. So basically it's an awful game, nasty graphics, terrible sound, and the playability is just non-existent. It's avoid stuff for 3 levels and then get shot as quickly as possible. My 5th worst game is another binary design offering from 1987 on the MAD packaging. That's Strike. And again, as mentioned in my previous video, it's a 10-pin bowling simulation. Nice graphics, nice sound. The problem is you've only got a 50-50 chance of actually getting the ball down the lane. Half the time you'll drop it on your foot or drop it on the lane behind you. And this is another one that's got a bug in it, in that if you get a strike in the last frame, the game goes into some kind of infinite loop where the game never ends and your score just gets all messed up. So basically it's a sports game to avoid, as most Mastertronic sports games are, but this one's particularly bad, even though the graphics and sound do look quite nice on it. The next terrible game in my rundown of the worst 10 Mastertronic games is Speed Zone, a 1989 Mastertronic release. It's another one of these single screen gallery shooters. The enemies on this move so quickly that the chances of actually shooting them is almost non-existent. Most of the time they just crash into you and you lose lives before you even start moving around the screen. It's got almost no sound in the game whatsoever, just a horrible sort of clunky blasting sound, no explosions or anything like that, and the graphics are pretty bland. It's got this weird kind of big expanded sprite in the corner that's something like a TARDIS or a satellite or something like that, but the gameplay's awful in it. You've got an energy bar, but more often than not the sequence of enemies that comes along the screen goes straight through you and all your energy is drained and you lose a life almost immediately. So yeah, totally terrible game, definitely one to avoid. So we now get to the worst 3 Mastertronic games in my opinion, and in third place we have 2 crap games for the price of 1. It's Mastertronic's Plus One, Bionic Granny and Jungle Story. 2 terrible games from the early set of games released by the Darling brothers, created using their games creator. Both of these games have got the same problem. It's effectively, you'll see all you're going to see for the game in the first 30 seconds of playing it. It doesn't get any different. Really simplistic gameplay, not very interesting gameplay either. Graphics are pretty bland, sounds terrible, music's terrible. Basically, it could have been any 2 games from the early Darling brothers lineup, in all honesty. These 2 are probably 2 of the worst, but it could also have been something like Dark Star or Orbitron. Those games, again, really boring gameplay, instantly forgettable, and you can't even get £1.99's worth of value. In this case, you're getting 2 games for £1.99, but it's still not worth it. My second worst game is another mad release from 1987. Isn't it funny how these mad releases should have been worth more and yet aren't even worth 2p, let alone £2.99. This one's Sport of Kings, and that's a horse racing simulation, but you don't have any involvement in the training or breeding or anything to do with that of the horses. It's quite simply, you look at the form of some horses, place 1 bet on the race. You can't place any more than 1 bet, and then you watch the horse race unfold and see if you can win some money. This is one of several games that Mastertronic released that are sort of focused on gambling, and my issue with all of these games is that there's really no point playing a gambling game when you're not actually winning any money. Same with the fruit machine simulators and the poker simulators, but what sets Sport of Kings apart from those games is that at least in those games you have some kind of control over the action. You can choose whether to nudge or hold reels on the fruit machine. You can choose whether to change cards on the poker game. On this one, literally all you do is see whether the horse won or lost races previously, what kind of form there is for the horse. But it really doesn't make any difference. Pretty much if you back the favourite or the second favourite, you'll win some cash. But it's not real cash, it's just bits on a computer which mean absolutely nothing. So basically, the reason it's second place is because it's a boring game and it just serves no purpose. And finally we have what I consider to be the worst Mastertronic game of all time, an early release from 1984, part of the original launch lineup from Mastertronic. For some reason they decided to charge £2.99 rather than £1.99 for this game. The game is the election game, and what can I say about this game? It's a simulation of campaigning for winning the election. You can take the role of one of 4 parties: Conservative, Labour, Liberals or an independent party, and you go around a number of constituencies trying to get more support. It tells you how many votes you've got already or expected to get in that particular constituency, and then you can then use some money to try and improve the number of votes you get. When you've gone around all the constituencies and you get to choose how many at the start of the game, and the votes start and you either win or lose based on the campaigning that you've done throughout the game. It's really boring. There's no fun to be had out of it. It's literally move from one location to the next and spend some money and hope for the best at the end of it. The graphics are really terrible. The game's actually written in BASIC. There's no real graphics. It's lots of text on the screen with quite gaudy backgrounds quite often that make it difficult to read. And best of all, or should I say worst of all, at the end of the game, if you decide you don't want to play again, it basically just drops out into the ready prompt back into the operating system. So all in all, the worst Mastertronic game of all time, and I can't believe they actually wanted to charge £2.99 for it. So that sums up my worst Mastertronic games. What can you say? There's 10 terrible games. There were plenty of other pretty bad games, but those were the worst in my opinion. Do you agree? Well, if not, then leave a comment. And if you do agree, then please do share your memories of those awful games.
If you only knew the power of the dark side.
2, 1, 0.